it reminds us that there is an after to the big horrible thing. It does end with a hope and possibility, and it is love that gets us there. If that is not a balm to the soul, I don't know what is. So I don't know about you, but my mental health is in the toilet. No doubt you can guess why. I don't have the stomach right now to address the state of the US and by extension the world. There are many more eloquent booktubers and YouTubers who can do a much better job of that than I can. But what I can do is offer you some great literature that has helped carry me through troubling times, past, present, and no doubt will again in the future, and I hope they can do the same for you. I should preface these recommendations by saying that when I'm looking for comforting literature during hard times, I'm not typically looking for escapism or light and cozy stories. Rather, I want to read narratives of people and characters who have weathered similar storms and have been able to transform their pain into something else. I hesitate to say beautiful, but something that helps us better understand humanity, which in turn might help us lead humanity to a better future. A lot of these books are sad, I will be honest about that, but they provide a space in which we can process our own sadness, and then they transform that sadness into something profound in a way that only art can. Also, I am coming to you live from my mother's house while I'm dog sitting, so I've got two good pups in the room with me. This is my girl, Stella. No doubt they will provide us with some much needed comic relief throughout this video. She wants her dinner, but it's not dinner time, so someone's gonna have to wait. Someone's gonna have to wait. Patience is a virtue. Starting with my very favorite novel of all time, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Out of all the genius work that Woolf wrote, I do think this is her masterpiece, but it is also one of her darker novels, but that darkness is transformative, as we will see, which is why I find it comforting. The novel focuses on the Ramsay family and their friends during 2 summer vacations to the Scottish Hebrides 10 years apart. While we read about the family's preoccupations, desires, and interactions, the Great War, World War I, is happening off-screen. To the Lighthouse is broken into 3 sections, which are essentially before, during, and after the war. It's never mentioned directly, only alluded to, but it changes the Ramsay family irreparably. In the final section, called The Lighthouse, we find a Ramsay family who has experienced immense loss and who's grappling with how to make sense of a world that has changed in unimaginable ways. Despite the pervasive grief, the novel ends on a hopeful note in which one of the main characters, Lily Briscoe, manages to marry her knowledge of the past with a vision for the future. And she does this through art, specifically painting. There are many, many things to admire and praise about the book, and there are many lenses through which we could read and analyze it, but in the context of today's issues, what I find so comforting about it is that it reminds us that there is an after to the big horrible thing. There is a future, there is an after, though that after may look entirely new compared to what came before. Like all of Woolf's work, every sentence is stunning and brilliantly constructed, and there's one passage in particular that I think really encapsulates this perspective of keeping the future in mind. Let me read it for you. So loveliness reigned and stillness, and together made the shape of loveliness itself, a form from which life had parted. Solitary like a pool at evening, far distant, seen from a train window, vanishing so quickly that the pool, pale in the evening, is scarcely robbed of its solitude, though once seen. Loveliness and stillness clasped hands in the bedroom, and among the shrouded jugs and sheeted chairs even the prying of the wind and the soft nose of the clammy sea airs rubbing, snuffling, iterating, and reiterating their questions. Will you fade? Will you perish? scarcely disturbed the peace, the indifference, the air of pure integrity, as if the question they asked scarcely needed that they should answer. We remain. After a modernist novel dealing with World War I must recommend a long modernist poem dealing with World War II, and if you haven't heard of it, you're in for a treat. It is Trilogy by H.D. I have just the collected poem edition, but it is in here. Hilda Doolittle, who published as H.D., was a poet, a novelist, and also the ex-girlfriend of Ezra Pound. Interesting stuff there. Though she was American, she spent most of her life in Europe and was living in London during the Blitz. In fact, she chose to stay in the city knowing it would be bombed, just to write about the experience, which is not a choice I would make, but I respect it. The inspiration for Trilogy came when H.D. was traversing the ruins of London with her ex-husband, a fellow poet and writer, Richard Aldington. So the story goes, he found a collection of poems by Robert Browning in the rubble, picks it up in his horror, tosses it back down, and exclaims, "What good is poetry in times like these?" H.D. then spends 43 poems divided into 3 sections, explaining what good poetry is in times like these. In a similar vein of To the Lighthouse, the speaker of Trilogy attempts to reconcile the past with an unrecognizable present in order to create a new future. Here, though, H.D. looks to the ancient past, specifically Greek and Egyptian mythology. In doing so, she traces a history of a resurrection after destruction, and art is the medium through which that resurrection occurs. So many lines of these poems are so powerful. To use Emily Dickinson's words, they make me feel like the top of my head was taken off. Let me read you a few. We are voyagers, discoverers of the not known, the unrecorded. We have no map. Possibly, we will reach haven, heaven. Still, the walls do not fall. I do not know why. We pause to give thanks that we rise again from death and live. H.D. is one of those writers that if you're deep into modernism, you know who she is, but she does not get nearly enough recognition outside of the niche circles. And I think she is one of the best poets, writers, certainly of the 20th century, if not ever. So I highly, highly recommend you check out her work, specifically Trilogy. A treat for Stella, gentle. And a treat for Cooper. He doesn't want to talk about it. One treat. That's my gentle boy. Speaking of the ancient Greeks, we have the Iliad of Homer. I only just read this for the first time like 3 months ago, but I was blown away by how truly timeless it is. Like for some reason, I was skeptical that I would see the relevance of a 3,000-year-old epic war poem, but I do. Considered the first great work of Western literature, the epic poem tells the story of the Trojan War and focuses on the Greek warrior Achilles, who seeks retribution after the loss of his beloved companion Patroclus in battle. Every book of this poem is laden with loss on all sides. Even the Olympian gods suffer losses. So unsurprisingly, grief is a major component of the epic, but specifically a grief so great that there can be no recompense. I know this sounds way too depressing to be comforting, but bear with me. My favorite moment of the epic, and I think the most poignant, comes after Achilles has killed the Trojan Hector, who killed Patroclus. Hector's father comes to Achilles asking for his son's body back, and then the two men sob together. They are enemies, but they can also acknowledge that grief transcends human boundaries. Grief is grief is grief. For me, the comfort comes in reading about how grief is timeless. And not only grief, also rage and desire for revenge. At one point, Achilles drags Hector's body around behind him on his chariot for hours on end, because that is the only way he knows to express his rage and get some kind of revenge, even though he knows it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help him get Patroclus back. I sure feel like I could do the same thing these days. Overall, I was just struck how the Iliad really does get to the heart of humanity, the human condition. It is so much more than a war story, and I have to admit, I judged it too soon. This is why you cannot judge a book by its cover. I think in times of stress and uncertainty, remembering what it is to be human in ways good and bad, beautiful and ugly, can help us remain grounded and also help us try to keep in mind that ultimately, underneath everything, we are more similar than we are different. Will there be a time in the future when the two sides of the current situation can come together and sob? Maybe. Not anytime soon, I doubt, but maybe someday. But real quick, if you're enjoying these recommendations so far or would like to see more of them, do consider hitting that subscribe button. This is Thought Couture, I'm Kelsey Joe, and I publish new videos just about every week on book recs and reviews, creative writing advice, and literary commentary. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is another hear me out recommendation. In a not-too-distant post-apocalyptic America, we follow an unnamed father and son who are traversing a hostile landscape in search of salvation. They face starvation, they face violence, they face cannibalism, they face horrors so disturbing that this video would be demonetized if I mentioned them. They have nothing, absolutely nothing, except love for each other. The love between the father and son is the only thing keeping them alive, but it is enough. I actually wrote an essay in college that was so good it got me into grad school. Arguing that the boy is positioned as a sort of Christ-like figure because he operates from this place of divine love. He shares what little food he has, he refuses to hurt another person, even if it would be in self-defense. This is a bit of a spoiler, so I just skip to the timestamp on the screen if you don't want to hear it. But therefore, the end of the novel suggests that the boy is somehow going to help bring about a resurrection, a rebirth of the world of sorts. For as bleak as the road is, it's not demoralizing. It does end with a hope and possibility, and it is love that gets us there. At the risk of sounding corny, I consider The Road a comforting book because it puts into such stark relief how sometimes love is the only good thing we have that cannot be taken from us. And at the end of the day, or the end of the world, that kind of divine love is the only thing that really matters. And I don't only mean unconditional love for another person, but love for its own sake. Thank you for hearing me out on this one. Stella's here. No, you're Stella. No, honey, you're Stella. No one's out there. No one's out there. Not the kind of dog intermission I was hoping for. De Profundis by Oscar Wilde. The Road is dark, but it is fiction. This is dark because it is nonfiction. Wilde wrote this piece while he was imprisoned for gross indecency, another word for homosexuality, and it is a letter to his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. The 80-page letter includes an account of his incarceration, reflections on his relationship with Douglas and his spiritual journey in jail, and also includes meditations on Christ as a romantic artist figure, as well as reflections on the consolations of art. Oh look! Got a little rainbow reflection. Let's consider that Wilde's spirit telling us that everything is going to be okay. I don't know if he would really say that, but let's pretend. I'll be honest, this is a tough read. It is raw and unrelenting in its emotional description of suffering. And the prose is stark, simple, straightforward in a way we don't typically associate with Wilde, but it just cuts to the core of pain. For example, this passage, suffering is one very long moment. We cannot divide it by seasons. We can only record its moods and chronicle their return. With us, time itself does not progress. It revolves. It seems to circle around one center of pain. Oof. Oof. Of course, Wilde is writing about his incarceration, but his language speaks to a suffering more universal. If you suffered anything ever in your life, isn't that the truth? That suffering is one very long moment? I would certainly agree, and it is comforting and validating to just hear it put so plainly. More importantly, though, Wilde experienced such profound darkness, But he's able to come out of it and be released from jail, not hating humanity and not being bitter. Couldn't be me. Wilde comes to the conclusion that suffering is part of the human experience and is therefore no less worthy than the life of indulgence he previously lived. Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground. Someday people will realize what that means. They will know nothing of life till they do. Wilde was able to transform his extreme hardship into spiritual growth and self-realization once again through the artistic process, and it's brilliant to witness. Again, not an easy read by any means, but one you won't soon forget.
Mr. Cooper's ready to talk about what happened. So a few days ago, someone got a severe case of the zoomies outside in the yard and ran a little too fast, too furious around a corner and broke his inner claw. Ain't that right? Problem is, he's such a good, happy boy, so full of love, that he simply can't contain it. We've got to learn to exercise a little self-control, buddy. Have a sense of decorum. We got to avoid this happening. This is not the first time, is it? No.
Now for something significantly less depressing, the poetry of Mary Oliver. If you need to read something life-affirming, look no further than Oliver. In her worldview, to simply be alive is a miracle. No matter what else may be happening in the world, the life itself is a gift, and therefore her work is filled with gratitude and joy and wonder. It's infectious in the best way, and I think it's impossible not to celebrate life with her. As you know, if you've read any of Oliver's work, it relies heavily on natural imagery and celebrating and honoring the earth and the non-human world. And as such, it serves as a reminder that human happenings are not all there is. The world is so vast and magnificent that human struggles, human issues seem insignificant in comparison. Now, this doesn't mean they are insignificant, not at all. In fact, by becoming more attuned to the rhythms and the workings of nature, Oliver believes we can then approach society and each other with greater generosity and gentleness. I came across a little article blog post from a website called The Wisdom Daily that describes this better than I can. Oliver is a poet of gratitude in an age of entitlement, a poet of praise in an age of criticism, a celebrant of the unstructured, the free, the unguilty, in a time dominated by clock's speed and a paradoxical embrace of both the brash and the puritanical. That is what makes her a dissident. I think too, because Oliver's work tends to be watered down on social media into inspirational quotes, we tend to overlook that she is politically engaged and she is calling us to action, even if it's not necessarily overt. The line that comes to mind is, "What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" She's not really talking about landing your dream job and making a bunch of money. I think instead she's saying, are you dead yet? No, you're not. Therefore, you can still choose to become alive to life. If that is not a balm to the soul, I don't know what is. Next up, I have the closest thing to a cozy read on this list, although I think I use that term loosely. You Are Not a Stranger Here, Stories by Adam Hazlitt. You may be familiar with Hazlitt's work from his novel Imagine Me Gone. This was his debut story collection. In these 9 stories, we meet characters who are all touched by some sort of loss, and then we're invited into their inner worlds. For example, the opening story centers on a father who's hoping to reconcile with his estranged son. In the story that contains the title, an American visiting Scotland confides in an elderly village woman about his depression and his crumbling marriage. And in the story that most rips my heart to shreds, called The Beginnings of Grief, a teenage boy carries on an abusive relationship with his classmate as a means of coping with his parents' deaths. That story in particular, I think, is a masterclass in character and developing emotional resonance, because clearly his actions are sick, but we can't help but sympathize and care for a young boy who simply has no idea how to handle immense grief. And that's an overarching theme in the collection. Hazlitt asks us to consider why people do the things that they do, particularly when that action comes from a place of pain. He also asks us to examine our own pain and our own loneliness and isolation, and then models ways to move beyond them. It's hard to believe that this is a debut story collection because every one of them really is incredibly well written, and they strike the perfect balance between subtlety or restraint and raw vulnerability. For any fiction writers watching, I recommend reading this once to experience it and then reading it a second time to study it, because I think there's a lot to learn here. Like, I wish I could write these stories. You Are Not a Stranger Here is a collection I've returned to again and again, particularly during troubling times, and I think you will love it too. My phone died at the very last minute, so it is the next day. But thank you very much for spending some time with me today. It's my sincere hope that if you're struggling now or maybe years into the future for some completely unrelated reason, that at least one of these book recommendations can give you some sort of solace and strength. Each one of these books has touched me deeply at some point in my life, and I would not recommend them if I didn't think they could have the same impact on someone else, if I didn't think they were potentially life-changing, and I would go so far as to say life-saving. Please do remember to take care of yourselves and each other now and going forward, and rest assured that if nothing else, at least this channel is a safe place where everyone is welcome and any sort of hatred or cruelty will not be tolerated. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. If you want to see something... Oh, hi, Stella! Stella's saying goodbye. If you want to watch something that's more light and fun and less serious, I think you'll enjoy this one. I hope you have the best possible day you can have. Let's put it that way, and I will see you in the next one.